Thank you for being with us this evening for the first Singapore Forum. We are talking about Asia, growth and developments. I'm sure you'll be focused on the latest events and trends and turning points, but I think it's useful to look at it from a longer point of view and take a more detached perspective of the direction the region is going. I think the trend is up. It's not a straight line, there are bends, ups and downs, but overall there's an uptrend. If you go back to the 1990s, people talked about an Asian century. There was a boom, investments were flowing in, countries were taking off. 10% growth a year in China, India also on the move. It seemed too good to last, and it was. The Asian crisis came in 1997, 1998. The world seemed to have come to an end, and people thought that was the end of Asia. But it wasn't the end of Asia. We picked ourselves up, we got going again, we fixed some of the problems, we learned how not to overreach ourselves, at least for a while. And so as a result, a decade later, when the global financial crisis came, Asia was not quite so badly affected as we might have been. Partly because we have put some things right 10 years ago, and so we're less vulnerable. I think also because the fear of God was still in us. And so we did not go overboard, whether it's derivatives, whether it's lending, whether it's banks overextending themselves. And so we came through a very serious world crisis, I think much better than we had any right to expect. Having come through, of course, you're into a new world, and when you think the sun shines, new issues will arise. And with QE, with zero interest rates, with capital flows, we face new challenges. And now with the end of QE, we have further shocks to navigate. So the trend has been up. We have come through, but we now are in a new landscape. And each of the countries has its own issues to solve. In Japan, Mr. Abe has been talking about his 3 arrows. Now they have been in the air for 2+ years. They haven't landed. Some progress has been made, but I think this is still very much work in progress and for anxious contemplation. In China, it's a turning point. The growth is still 7%. By other country standards, that's still very good. But I think the Chinese government know, and investors also know, that they have to do important structural and political decisions in order to enable the growth to grow, to continue, in order to be able to tap the potential of the people and of what the economy is capable of, whether it's agricultural reform, whether it's household system, whether it's the SOEs, whether it's pollution and the environment. These are all big, hairy, difficult problems which cannot be deferred any longer. And we hope that they will succeed, because if they succeed, then China will be on a steady path, and that will be a great relief to the rest of the region. In India, with a new government under Mr. Modi, I think Mr. Modi also has plans to change India, but India doesn't change very rapidly, whoever is the Prime Minister. I think the new direction has been set, some important priorities have been defined, and some of the states are, I think, determined to make more than steady progress. For example, in Andhra Pradesh, which has now been carved off and has lost Telangana, they are building a new capital city, and the Chief Minister, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu, he's visited Singapore recently, and he's bringing in investments from all over the world. And we are also there helping him, starting to do a master plan, a first draft for the new capital city, and we hope being able to help him to take it a step forward. Within ASEAN, we are working towards an ASEAN community by the end of this year. The target was 2015. Now that it is 2015, the target is the 31st of December 2015. And we have, I think we will achieve 85% of what we are aiming to do. There will be work in progress and new agenda for the morning after. But we will make some progress in integrating ourselves economically in terms of a social community, in terms of a political and cultural, political and security cooperation. ASEAN countries naturally have their own preoccupations and challenges. There's succession, there's generational change, there are political issues, there are ethnic issues in several ASEAN countries. So these are things we are individually preoccupied about, but I think it's necessary for all of us to take some of our mind share away from these day-to-day preoccupations and work on the longer-term cooperation, which is important even though it's not urgent. That's what the landscape looks like if you take an economic growth, investment, prosperity point of view. But actually, the economy and the growth and the prosperity depends on other factors which are not economic. And I would just name three of them which are salient. One, I think there's the force of nationalism, which we have to contend with, or we have to think about in many countries. It's a positive force. It gives you pride. It gives people motivation to go and do well and outdo the other fellow. But it's also a possible cause for people to turn inwards. It's also a possible reason for conflict between nations. And you're not arguing over resources, but over historical issues, which are very difficult to resolve and to come to a single consensus upon. So you see it in many countries. In fact, it's not just in Asia, even in Europe, you see the same kind of virulent nationalist sentiments in extreme right-wing parties, some extreme left-wing parties. And it's a response to globalization, uncertainty, the stresses and strains of trying to improve your life in a very uncertain world. And these similar stresses and strains affect us, and I think that's one of the reasons why you see that in Asian countries too. But that's one factor which we have to watch carefully. A second factor would be territorial issues. You know what they are. There are some between China and Japan. There's few islands between Japan and Korea. Not so hot a subject, but it is an issue. And there are atolls and reefs in the South China Sea, which are the subject of dispute between China and several ASEAN countries, and therefore of concern to ASEAN as a group. These are not hot wars, but they are not conflicts which are not tensions which are going to disappear, because no country is going to stand back and say, my claim is less legitimate than yours. My claim is indisputable, your claim is also indisputable. And when two things are indisputable, you have a dispute, which becomes insoluble. So that is a challenge. I think you could have a mishap, you could have an incident which can escalate, and then we would be in uncharted waters. I think the third thing which we have to watch is security issues, and particularly terrorism, extremist terrorism. ISIS is far away in the Middle East, but is not far away on the internet. It's one click away on the internet. And ISIS is attracting people from all over the world to go and become fighters for them, for their crazy cause. The tally is maybe 20,000 fighters have gone to ISIS in the last couple of years, which is more than the total number of fighters who went to Afghanistan over a very long period when the Soviets were there. And they're going from all over the world, places which have nothing to do with the Middle East, or Syria or Iraq, know nothing about Syria and Iraq, and they go. Hundreds have gone from European countries, hundreds have gone from Indonesia, dozens have gone from Malaysia, a couple we know of have gone from Singapore. So it's in this region. They go, well, that's gone. But they come back, they bring the virus with them. And ISIS has told them and told their people, those who might be supporting them in countries far away, do something in your own place, cause some mayhem. And that's why the Australians have had incidents, and I think that's why we in Southeast Asia have to take this threat very seriously. The security issue is one part of it, the ideological part, the religious part, the racial integration and harmony part of this problem is also important and more fundamental to holding ourselves together and not allowing this virus to become a fatal flaw in our body politic. So those are the non-economic factors. We don't always think about them, but we must know that unless those things work out right, talking about growth and prosperity, you're making a lot of presumptions which may or may not come true. So I think there are many things to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I think you've given us really a tour of the horizon, and that leaves a lot of room for people to raise questions. I am going to ask you a question on the subject of nationalism, which you spoke of, and I think you see how it acts, how it grows, and how it can act in a very disruptive way. That will prevent us working with each other in the most optimum way in the region. Have you any advice on how we can step back or moderate increasing nationalism that can be destructive?
Well, some of the issues arise from historical factors. For example, between China and Japan, a lot of it goes back to the Sino-Japanese War and the unsatisfactory way in which that ended without a reconciliation on both sides, unlike in Europe. And hard as it is, I think it is necessary for both sides to try and move forward from where they are and reach such a more honest appraisal of history and an ability to be able to detach yourself. And that's hard because there's a lot of momentum which has been built up over years of school books, education, propaganda, films, and national mindsets, which are a reality. But if you can't go beyond that, then we are going to be arguing over this 100 years from now, and I think that is highly unproductive. I think another aspect, another reason why nationalism becomes a problem instead of a positive force is when people are uncertain of their future. They feel threatened, they feel anxious, they worry that their jobs are being taken away, that foreigners are coming in, changing the fabric of their society. What's going to happen to me? And so you say, well, let's push it all out. Let's send all these problems away. If the foreigners go away, the problems will go with them. And we will go back to the good old days, which were, of course, perfect. And I think that we have to be able to address the anxieties and give people a sense of assurance that, yes, there are uncertainties, there are problems. You can't run away from the competition, but we can help you to meet the competition, and we can help you to hold your own in this complex world. You're not alone. And if you can give people more confidence and assurance, then paradoxically, I think there'll be less need for them to assert this closed, xenophobic, and destructive attitude.
Can I get into something more specific then? How important is the impact of the China, Japan, and Republic of Korea relationship on Asia's economies?
Well, I think it's important, firstly, because both China and Japan are major economies and major influences in the region, and if they are not friends with each other, it's harder for us to be friends with both, which we would like to be. But secondly, if China-Japan relations are rough, I think it's an indication of the zeitgeist, the mindset in these two countries. I mean, it's bound to lead to more strident voices, more nationalist attitudes, and that's bound to impact the relations of these countries with the rest of the region as well. Particularly, I think, between China and Southeast Asia, because China's interactions with Southeast Asia are very, very intense now. So we really would like to see peace and calm in Northeast Asia from our part of the region.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now, I'm going to open the discussion to the floor, and we will invite questions from the audience. If you stand up to ask a question, may I just request that you say your name and your organization. This is simply to help the Prime Minister understand where the question is coming from. And we would really like questions, but not statements. So the floor is yours. Can we have the first question, please? Yes. Oh, Ambassador Kurt Wagger.
Well, I guess I don't have to introduce myself. Thank you, Heng Chee. Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister, and I want to first extend condolences, I'm sure on behalf of everyone here. It was a very meaningful week to be here. And one of the things that was reminded was the commitment to the institutions that government, along with the private sector, the emphasis that was placed on that all through Singapore's history. And now, as you mentioned, regional integration, whether it be TPP, whether it be the ASEAN Economic Community, what role do you see governments playing with the private sector to achieve these goals and continue the trajectory towards integration regionally and attracting businesses from around the world as you have with the US here in Singapore?
Well, there are very few economies in Asia which are purely laissez-faire. They are free market, they are competitive, open to varying degrees, but in all of them, the government plays an important role, setting economic policy, having social programs, and setting the international economic policy so that you have the economic diplomacy to conclude trade agreements in order to have the political framework and the institutional framework for trade, investments, capital, talent to flow. And I think that continues to be the case. Certainly for the TPP, the governments play a vital role because if they don't negotiate a good deal and they can't sell the deal and market it to their own populations and their own stakeholders as a good deal, is not going to work. And I would say that is true even in the United States. Because the USTR has the president fully behind him, but unless the congressmen and the senators are also sold, and they won't be sold unless there's a significant proportion of the population who support this, the deal is going to run into a lot of trouble in Congress, and we're going to have a problem. And having spent 4 or 5 years of intense effort, I think that would be a great pity, not just from an economic point of view, but really also from a strategic point of view, because the TPP's meaning is that we are linking the two sides of the Pacific closer together, stitching them together, and giving substance to the idea of the US being a Pacific power. And I know this is an election year in the US. It's not the sort of time when people are very, very focused on subjects other than the elections, or next year is an election year, and the campaign has already begun. But I hope that in the midst of your preoccupations, there will be time to put in a good word for Asia Pacific, for free trade, and for the TPP. And if we can do Singapore as well, it's even better.
Thank you. Yes, I think on the right side.
Michael Witter, I have the pleasure to be German ambassador here in Singapore. Prime Minister, you visited Europe quite a few months ago, including my country.
In January, yes.
My question would be, how do you see the future perspective relationship between Europe and Southeast Asia? We have a strong economic basis, but I think there are many more things we could do together.
Well, we very much hope that the economic relationship will grow. I think Europe has a very big domestic agenda to be preoccupied with, agenda within the individual countries doing structural reforms, particularly Southern Europe, but not just Southern Europe, an agenda Europe-wide to talk about the institutions and the systems in the EU and in the Eurozone, and how do you balance between the country and the continent and the EU, and how do you get your people to buy into this European vision. But for Europe to achieve its vision and to prosper, you have to link up with the world. And Singapore is small, but Asia is a big and vibrant market, And European companies have to be there, which means European countries also have to be engaged. And I was very happy that when I was in Germany in January, and then I visited Spain, I was able to engage and talk to a very wide range of people, not just government leaders and parliamentarians, but also business people and academics, and be able to have them focus on and be interested in what's happening in Asia and what are the opportunities for German companies, for German institutions to extend their reach in Asia. I think that is important. Even though your own domestic economies may be having difficulties or may be having issues to be sorted out, your companies, in many cases, have global reach. And we really would welcome them to be in Asia, whether it's Siemens or Bosch, or whether it's Santander or Shell. The European companies are global names, and you can't be a global name unless you are fully engaged in this part of the world.
Thank you. I think Professor Lee, Chong-Moon Lee, from Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I was in Singapore last week as part of President Park Geun-hye's delegation to the late Prime Minister's funeral. And I think all of us in this room share the deep sense of loss that one of Asia's giants has finally passed away. My question to you, sir, is one of the biggest issues facing Asia and the world is how we will manage the US-China relationship over the next 20, 30 years. Singapore, Korea, Australia, Japan, every single country across the region thinks about how we're going to manage this huge relationship without, I guess, fallout. So could I ask you, Prime Minister, what are your thoughts on how best we can manage the emerging US-China relationship? Thank you very much.
We cannot manage the relationship. Only America and China can. We can only adapt ourselves to how the relationship is. I mean, what we can do is we can participate in regional cooperation, in regional integration, in regional security and political discussions, so that there is a framework for cooperation within the region, which includes the United States. And issues can be discussed, and countries have a place at the table, and even small countries have a chance to have their interests represented, even if they don't always dominate. There is a Chinese phrase, it says, 小国无外交. It means literally, small country, no foreign policy. What it means really is small country is not entitled to a foreign policy, because you have to take the world as it is and you react to it. You do not shape the world. We feel that acutely. Korea is 8 times our size, so perhaps you don't feel it quite so acutely, but still your neighbors are more than 8 times your size. So we take the world as it is, but where we can work together through regional cooperation like in ASEAN, where we can work together in an Asia-Pacific-wide framework like APEC, where we can talk about security issues like the Asia Regional Forum, and not least participate and try our best to make the UN an effective forum, and the UN Security Council, and that's not an easy matter, but work through that. Then I think there's an environment in which we can manage to find a position however the relations between America and China will be. We hope they'll be good, then it's easier for us. If they are not, if they are trouble, well, we will try our best not to have to choose sides. But sometimes that may not be possible.
I'd like to give the floor to a woman in the room. Yes. Mrs. Ahluwalia.
Thank you. Prime Minister, from the geopolitical to the basic necessity of water. In India, with rapid growth and urbanization, we have a water crisis which is perhaps as large as the energy crisis that we are more used to worrying about and thinking about. Now, Singapore really is an example to the world on how you have overcome the challenges of water insecurity. But I understand that in making the whole process financially sustainable, in Singapore, you not only have a full cost pricing of water, but you have a price which is for costing the next drop that you will get, which is marginal cost pricing. Now, for a poor country like India, when we talk of pricing water, we normally say that the government has to provide the capital cost of infrastructure, and the utility tries to cover operation and maintenance cost. My question to you is, what would be your advice to countries like India at our current stage of development, and how difficult was it for you to move from the full cost principle to marginal cost pricing?
Well, we are not a purist in these matters. No, please sit down, I will explain. Water for us has always been an existential issue. Right from the first day when we became independent, in fact, when we negotiated the separation from Malaysia, this was a key issue, because at that time we were almost exclusively dependent on water supply from Malaysia, and we wanted to make absolutely sure this would be guaranteed. And it was so guaranteed in our fundamental founding documents of the Republic. And it has been an obsession of the government, and particularly of my father's, all his life. So every drop was pursued. Every place you could build a reservoir, we did one. Every place where you could make sure the pipes didn't leak, we focus on that. Every device which could be installed so that your water closets use less water or your taps are not left running, we did that. And pricing was one of the factors there. We did not go to full pricing for some time, but we did have it quite clear that we have to raise the price and people have to feel that the pain, and then that will cause them to think of water not as an endless resource, but something precious to be conserved. But eventually we decided, we reached the limits of what we could develop, and then we had to go beyond in order to go for new sources of water, desalination, reuse of used water. Is really sewage which has to be cleaned up, and then we put reverse osmosis and we use the water again. And that's a lot more expensive. And that is where my next drop is going to come from. So one day, we had a forum one day, and I asked people, I said, this bottle, it costs you $1. Now the government water, $1, I have several cubic meters of this stuff. There's about 5,000 bottles. So in many countries, people drink water from the bottle. In Singapore, we drink water from the tap. So the tap water has to be at the right price, and the right price is what is the next drop coming from. And so we moved. We didn't move overnight. We took a couple of years. And we also had subsidies in cash to the low-income households so that this did not cause hardship to them. I mean, I give you the money. If you want to use it because you need the water, that's fine. If you don't, you'll be conscious that the water is a precious resource. And I think it was accepted, not least because from time to time, radical and irresponsible people in some of our neighboring countries will say, you know, the Singaporeans are not being cooperative, we'll turn the taps off. So that helped me to make people understand that this was a serious matter. Now, if you are not in our situation where it's clearly an existential issue, and you ask me what to do, I would say, well, for a start, let's try to price it just based on what the cost is. Never mind about marginal pricing. Just price it so that your operations are recovered. If you can recover the capital cost, so much the better. But if not, as a first step, don't let anybody make a hole in the pipe and take the water away for free. Long ago, we used to have loans from the World Bank when we were not quite so developed. And the World Bank loans, those of you who have borrowed will know, come with a condition that they are only for projects which have an 8% IRR. And we were not short of cash, but we borrowed from the World Bank. Why did we do that? Because then we can explain to our people that the World Bank requires 8% internal rate of return on the project to build this water plant, and the water plant has to be financially viable, and we have to charge people money properly for the water in order that we have the economically correct, sensible outcome. And one which ultimately leads people to be able to afford the water. Otherwise, if you give it away for free, and you have standpipes which are running, well, where does that lead to? How do we get the system going? So Singapore is small. We can do that. If we were 1,500 million people, then I would choose a small corner and start first.
Yes, thank you. Yes?
李总理，我来自中国的企业家俱乐部。去年您曾经热情地邀请我们来访问，而且您还和我们这个俱乐部的企业家亲切的交流，谢谢您。我的问题是，您如何评价习近平主席提出的“一带一路”的这样设想和安排？一带就是丝绸之路经济带，一路就是海上丝绸之路。如果您认可的话，那么新加坡作为国际的金融中心，特别是作为中国之外的最大的人民币离岸中心，应该怎么样的发挥作用？谢谢。
The question for those of you who didn't get the translation is, what's my assessment of China's Maritime Silk Road and the new Silk Road economic belt proposal, and how does Singapore take advantage from it? I think these are positive proposals by China to cooperate with the countries in its region, along Southeast Asia and South Asia, and also into Central Asia to Europe. I think the substance of it, what specific projects they will consist of, and what schemes for cooperation, I think these are details which we are waiting to understand from the Chinese, and we look forward to understanding better to see how we can fit into it. I think even without specific knowledge of the schemes, we can see the cooperation within the region developing. In Southeast Asia, certainly, China is the biggest trading partner of nearly all the countries in the region, including of Singapore. And I would not be surprised if that is, I'm sure that must be so of the Central Asian economies as well. And Singapore hopes that will grow, and we will be able to do more in China. And at the same time, we hope that we will be able to maintain our links with the other financial centers in the world, with our own region, and therefore to become useful to China and to have a role for ourselves.
In case you need the translation, the simultaneous translation units is on the table. Yeah. Yes, the next question. Yes, Ambassador Philip Green, High Commissioner Philip Green.
Thank you, Heng, Chee, and Prime Minister, thank you very much for your characteristically clear and forthright exposition. Of all the things you mentioned, one of the things that chimes most with those in Australia is the concerns over global terrorism, and the way in which people in our countries who we never expected are travelling overseas and perhaps producing threats for us in the future. Here in this country, you've made considerable efforts to make sure that there is an enviable harmony between people of different religions. I'm wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit about Singapore's experience, and are there things in the Singaporean experience which, even our very different context in Australia, in Europe, in other parts of the world, are there things from your experience which could be relevant to us?
I think every society is different, and the context and the history are important. In Singapore, we have been very sensitive about race and religion for a very long time because of our history. And we are a multiracial society. We have had racial tensions, riots, religious riots, murders before. And as a country, we were founded on the principle of multiracialism as one of the cardinal ideals of the Republic. And so we have made many steps to have the basis for sound racial relations and racial harmony. For example, we require our public housing estates to be ethnically integrated. Every block, every neighborhood has to have a certain proportion of Chinese, of Malays, of Indians. And also now we have had to make a requirement that between citizens and permanent residents, the proportions also have to be maintained. And therefore, we do not have ghettos, we do not have a geographical segregation between one community and another, which you see in some other countries, in many other countries. If we hadn't had a public housing program which covers 85% of the population, we couldn't have done that. We are very conscious of the need to compromise and to accommodate one another. We are not purists about freedom of speech. The Europeans are, the Americans are, the Australians, I think to a considerable extent, share those values. But in our circumstances, we have decided that we have to be practical. And if you insisted on absolute freedom of speech, you would gravely offend others. And when it comes to race and religion, the temperature in the room can go up very, very rapidly. So we accept restraints on what we can say to one another and what would constitute sedition and inflammatory conduct. And we accept those compromises. We work very hard with the religious leaders. And in the case of jihadist terrorism, most importantly, we have to work with the Muslim religious leaders so that they help us to solve the problem and they help us to guide the Muslim community along the right paths in terms of what the religion teaches, and also help us to set right the terrorists who have gone on the wrong way to try and bring them back, so that it's not just locking them away, but really reorienting them. Then they understand the error of their past ways, and in future it will not happen again. These are things that we have been able to do in Singapore. I would not say that, therefore, we have nothing to worry about, because we remain a multiracial society. And if we did have a terrorist attack, which was jihadist, and that has a religious element to it, the morning after, I think our race relations, the tenor will have changed. We'll be under tension. You can heal it back after a long time, but people may be polite to one another, but the suspicions, the fears, the anxieties will be only just below the surface. And that's a very, very dangerous place for a multiracial society like us to be. If that's our situation, I think yours will be different, but that's why we take this matter very, very seriously.
Now, I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Who would like to have the floor now? Yes, Ambassador? Another ambassador.
Ambassador of Japan.
Yes.
I think diplomats are asking too many questions. But so I'll try a little bit different track. My question is simple. What will be the aspiration, or what should be the aspiration of the Asia-Pacific in the coming decades?
What should be the aspiration of the Asia-Pacific in the coming decade?
Peace, prosperity, and security.
Yes. Yes, there's a hand up there. Yes.
My name is Wan Saiful Wanjan. I'm from the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas in Malaysia. Mr. Prime Minister, maybe building up from your answer to the previous question, how do you think governments in this region should respond to demands for greater political participation and greater political competition?
Governments should respond.
How should governments?
I think it depends which government you are. I mean, every country is different. There are certain common trends because the young generation in many countries, you're exposed to the internet, you travel, you have different life experiences, you're exposed to the same challenges and uncertainties of globalization, and the governments have to respond to them. I think one of the ways you have to do this is to try and find young people from that generation also to engage themselves in the work of the government, in the work of leading the country and identifying with that population, because you need gray hair in a team, but you also need young, vigorous people who are of that generation in the team. In some countries, you need to, there are changes and liberalizations and reforms which are necessary to adapt the system to the times. In other countries, you are basically got the right system, but even when you do have the right system, it is necessary for you to keep on adapting it to the tempo of the times and the needs of the society. No system will work perfectly without regular tuning and adjustment, and from time to time even overhaul. And I think we have to take that approach. I don't think there's any single formula which will solve this problem. You might get the impression when you read some newspapers because they have a solution to every problem in the world. But when you are actually doing it, you'll find that not all your solutions apply to all of your problems.
Thank you. I think there's a hand there. The organizers would not mind. I'm one of the organizers, actually. If we extended another minute or two, but I know you're waiting for dinner, so that will be the last question.
Hi, my name is Malik Ali from BFM Radio in Malaysia. Quick question. If China were to insist on its 9-dash line and take steps to visibly show that it's insisting on it, would Singapore throw its lot behind its ASEAN neighbors like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia?
I think China does insist on its 9-dash line. I think that the other countries also insist on their position, and Singapore takes no position on the merits of the territorial and maritime claims. Our position is these have to be dealt with peacefully in accordance with international law, including the law of the sea, and freedom of navigation is important to us and should be respected. And ASEAN has a role in this to try and keep the temperature down and tempers down and prevent this from becoming a violent conflict. I think the countries have at stake in the South China Sea not just the specific claims or the waters or the sands or the gas and oil which may or may not be there, but also their reputation and their standing worldwide for what kind of country they are, how they resolve international disputes, whether or not they abide by international norms, and are constructive players in the global community of nations. And these are and all countries have to consider that. And no country in this world, in this age, is an island unto itself. And I think that will constrain the calculations, and I hope also the conduct and the actions of the participants in these disputes.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister. With your permission from the audience, I think I'll draw this dialogue to a close. We have touched this evening, Prime Minister, you have touched on the geopolitical issues, the economic issues, the social issues, and political issues of Asia. And really, as we go forward, these are the very many areas that we will have to work out, and each country will have to work, our issues out. But we can also work our issues out with each other in a cooperative way. And I hope this conference, this Singapore Forum tomorrow, will lead us to think of more concrete ways in which we can tackle our issues going forward. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Heng Chee.